be presenting on the essay Construction of World Literature in Colonial and Post-Colonial India, written by Vinay Dharwadkar. So Vinay Dharwadkar is professor of English at the University of Wisconsin Madison. He did his PhD from University of Chicago in 1989, and his research interests are British literature since 1900s, theory and interdisciplinary studies, Anglophone literature, colonialism and post-colonialism, world literature, comparative studies, and translation studies, and also South Asian studies. So Vinay Dharwadkar opens this essay with the prevalent critical theories of the at that time in India, and they were mainly divided into two categories of Marg and Deshi. So Marg basically consisted of entire body of verbal representation, music, dance, theater, and other arts. Its theory and practice were basically all a part of Sanskrit centric classical canon and tradition. And on the other hand, Deshi category, it consisted of non-canonical uh, arts in various different mother tongues, new mother tongues, um, mainly vernacular languages. They were all post-classical arts formed in the small spaces where Sanskritic arts were absent. And next, uh, Dharwadkar mentions an Indologist named Sheldon Pollock, and Pollock also gives his own definition of Marg and Deshi. So, according to Pollock, Marg is a path or way designated the normative traditions, methods, modes, and figuratively spatialized stylistic disposition of cosmopolitan Sanskritic culture, whereas Deshi means of the land, country, province, or region, denoted the literary and aesthetic practices of indigenous, regionalized, or localized vernacular places. So this, according to Dharwadkar, this was a Hindu perspective. And next, he mentions a term, Sanskrit term Sahitya, which we use it uh, alternatively with literature. And according to Hindu perspective, all Sahitya or literature was classified as either Marg or Deshi. So no room for elements outside of Bharatvarsha was considered. And next, equivalent of this both binary, Marg and Deshi, we also have our own, I mean, there is also another binary which is related to the subject, world literature, which is Vishwa and Rashtra. This concept were also from Sanskrit, uh, and They were also assimilated into different languages, which were derivative of Sanskrit, namely Bengali, Hindi, Marathi, and others. So a Rashtra is a technical term which we use for nation, and its epic political and legal discourse variably meaning territory, country, kingdom, empire, the people or subjects of a realm, and it became a choice, a signifier for the modern term nation. By the end of uh, Indian-British War of 1957, the big revolt which happened in 1857, Vishwa Sahitya or world literature and Rashtriya Sahitya or national literature became pre-emergent or emergent categories. Um, these two categories were not actually a response to the Western ideas, according to Dharwadkar, but large-scale material of infrastructural transformation centered on the print medium. Now, Dharwadkar begins to expand how the print uh, market or print culture was so prevalent in India, and even when there was British Raj, the we uh, I mean the people at the time, the Indian people made the print so strong and so widely circulated that there were about any languages you can guess it they were present at that time, around 40 languages, including 30 Indian languages and dialects: Arabic, Armenian, Burmese, Chinese, Javanese, Malay, Maldivian, Persian, Singapore, and Thai as well. And by the mid 19th century, British India had begun to witness the virtually ceaseless circulation and consumption of print and textuality. So, the English education in India, following Macaulay's Minute of 1835, the budget of it was only £10,000. In contrast, the print market was valued um, around £313,000 in 1850. So you can see the vast gap between what the English were investing in Indian education while they were getting a profit of around uncountable percentages. Now, Dharwadkar begins to expand on the term Vishwa Sahitya. Uh, in basic sense, it means literature of the world, where Vishwa as qualifier signifies worldwide as well as universal. The phrase thus represents Sahitya that is Vishwatmaka, or universal in disposition. So, according to this term and its connotated meanings, Vishwa Sahitya can mean world literature, universal literature, and universalistic literature, and cosmopolitan literature at the same time. And in different sense, multivalent sense, Vishwa Sahitya also hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
What
I lost connection. It was showing I lost connection, but yeah, now I'm back.
with a bang? You're back with a bang.
Yes, sir.
You are back with a bang.
No, no, sir. Not exactly. So now Dharwadkar compares this Marg and Deshi binary with Latin and European vernaculars binary, as in Dante's de Vulgari Eloquentia, and the Vishwarashtra opposition arises in India explicitly when the framework of the lived experience of cultural differences in the colonial encounter with Europe. So Vishwarashtra opposition only arises when we are contrasting our own lived experience, our own lived cultural experience with that of uh, the colonial encounter. In the second part, uh, Dharwadkar basically expands on the concept of Sahitya, and he mentions Rabindranath Tagore here, and Tagore gives his own definition of the word Sahitya. The word Sahitya comes from Sahit. Hence, we find in the word Sahitya the idea of union. It is not simply a union of idea and idea, language and language, book and book. Nothing except Sahitya or literature can establish deeply intimate ties between one person and another, between past and present, between far and near. The people of a country deficient in literature have no vital bonds to join them. They remain isolated. So Tagore gives the idea of Sahitya and the importance of Sahitya at the same time. That Sahitya means a union of a bunch of things. It can also be a union of idea and idea, language and language, book and book. So, according to him, the word Sahitya itself was so inclusive that if we add Vishwa ahead of Sahitya, it can only mean inclusion and uh, nothing else, I would guess. So this formulation of the uh, thinking about literature given by Tagore, it was prevalent in the next century as well in the Indian tradition, parallel to its English counterpart together. So Sahit in Sanskrit can also mean it also has different meanings like with, along with, together, associated, united, uh, derived from Sahit as an abstract noun. Sahitya then represents a plurality of interlinked objects or their condition of mutual accompaniment, association, togetherness, unification, or union. So the word itself refers to objects in their interrelatedness, according to Dharwarkar. So, and then he touches upon the concept that Shelley gave of intertexture. So, this concept is somewhat similar to what we learned in beginning of comparative literature about the of uh, interliterariness of literature. So, according to Dharwarkar, Sahitya and not Sahitya, but classical Sanskrit does not always specify what objects Sahitya conceptually interconnects or how, but poetics after the 7th century generally assumes that it brings together poet Kavi and sympathetic respondent Sahridaya, existentially experienced feeling which is Bhava, uh, and aesthetically represented emotion, rasa, as well as poetic imagination of pratibha and textual figuration, alamkara. So, kavi, which is poet, and the reader, or there is no mention of particular reader, but there is a mention of Sahridaya. So, the reader shares the same sympathetic bond, and it the Sahridaya responds to Kavi, which is a poet, and they share the existentially experienced feeling, bhava. Now, bhava is always intrinsic to everybody. It does not have to be uh, taught or implied. It is always there, according to the classical Sanskrit tradition, and aesthetically represented emotion. So this emotion is somewhat uh, aesthetically reproduced. This is not something. This is different from bhav, as in this emotion is not uh, an intrinsic reaction to what you consume. It is an aesthetically reproduced emotion. Now, Dharwadkar mentions A.K. Ramanujan's theory in Indian Poetics, published in 1974. A.K. Ramanujan says the word means joined together. Ramanujan also gives his own definition of Sahitya. The word means joined together, and literature is thus a togetherness of word and meaning. It is on the relationship possible between word, shabda, and sense, artha, that all utterance is classified, but the type of utterance that interseated that interested the poeticians most is that in which neither word nor sense is self-important, where both are indispensable because together they serve the overall structure. This is the joining which is called Sahitya. So his definition is, although seemingly very different from what Tagore said, because it is very specific about Shabda and its earth, and it cannot, in isolation, we cannot consume it, and it will not be Sahitya. We will have to put both of them together and then consume it, and then it will be Sahitya, because together they serve the overall structure. And Tagore also says the same thing somewhat. He mentions the union of idea and idea, language and language, book and book, one person and another, between past and present, between and near, between far and near. So for us, the student of literature, Shabda and Arth may mean all of these things as well. So Dharwadkar says that Ramanujan develops a structuralist interpretation of Sanskrit theory that keeps the significations of Sahitya within the circumference of language and textuality. Tagore adopts a more open and radical approach in his lecture. Literature's intertexture is not only between idea and idea, language and language, book and book, but also between literary and the non-literary. Tagore's reference to intimate ties seems to invoke, on the one hand, the Western conception of literature as a site of ethical engagement and potential friendship between writer and reader, and on the other hand, the canonical Sanskrit conception of the ideal reader of a text as a sahridaya, a responsive connoisseur who is one at heart with its author. Now, Dharwadkar says that Tagore's stance, it foreshadows. So, foreshadows Eric Obark's position in his 1952 essay. So Tagore gave this definition at a lecture in 1919, 1919, and Obark in his essay Philology and World Literature. This essay was written in 1952. So, which says that literature is the self-expression of human interiority, and since that interiority and its self-expression unfold in history, which includes not only the past but also the present. The task of philology, A historicist discipline guided by a historicist humanism is to recover the inner history of mankind, which is the history of mankind achieving self expression. So, this what he says is so similar to what Tagore said as well, as in the unification of past and present. So, a historicist discipline guided by a historicist humanism, that the union of human and another human, and far and near, etc., etc. And the history of mankind achieving self expression. Both Tagore and Auerbach, writing more than 50 years apart, echo Goethe from the 1820s. Now, he also invokes Goethe, who in 1820s gave the first concept of world literature, as in Welty literature. And the essay we studied in the Core 11 also starts, Core 11 by Sandra Berman also starts with this concept of wealthy literature given by Goethe. He said that wealthy literature is universal possession of mankind, and it confirms with what Marx and Engels as Engels' agenda as well, agenda of a post-national state. In that essay of Berman, she expands on the history of how world literature in comparison to the comparative literature fared. So in the beginning, in early 20th century, there was French school, and it basically said that two different national languages and the rapport the face between them, it only that two different European national languages and the report the face between them, only that can be termed as comparative literature. Everything else from that is considered world literature. So the meaning of world literature was in its negation. After that, inside the US, it was very less politicized compared to European at the time, and was more idealistic. American school was interdisciplinary and less restrictive. Henry Remarque in 1961 said that comparison of one literature with another and comparison of literature with other spheres of human expression was considered to be world literature. Um, Humanities or world literature or great books of uh, were considered at undergraduate level, even if the US definition of world literature was less restrictive and more idealistic, but the position of world literature in the academics of American school were not as great as that of comparative literature. So, according to Harry Levin in 1965, world literature should be a part of undergraduate studies and comparative literature as a graduate discipline. And then comes the modern concept where world literature once again became very prominent area of study, and the theory was given by David Damrosch. He says that I take world literature to encompass all literary works that circulate beyond their original culture of origin, either in translation or in their original language. In its most expansive sense, world literature could include any work that has reached far beyond its home base. It can be effective when active in a literary system beyond its original culture. So at the end of 20th century and the beginning of 21st century, it became a vibrant species of comparative literature, according to Berman. So at the end of that essay of Berman, Berman, she revises once again what Goethe's wealthy literature means. And wealthy literature is intrinsic to our past as it is important to our present and future. So we came where we started from. We started with wealthy literature and we ended with wealthy literature. And this essay, what we are studying of Dharwalkar also has this similar feature. It started with what Tagore said in as definition of world literature, and at the end of the third part of the essay, it ends with what Tagore said about world literature as well. So Dharwalkar compares what Tagore says and what Goethe says in the third part of the essay. It starts with conceived this way, Sahitya becomes a screen on which the modern Indian globalizing imagination projects its picture of the world. So in the 1907 lecture astonishingly titled World Literature, Tagore was given a task to conduct a lecture on comparative literature, but he says that according to him, there was very little difference between the two terms. Actually, he did not say that, but uh, comparative literature is the English title, and in Bengali, he said that he shall call it Vishwa Sahitya and world literature. So yeah, basically, according to him, there was no major difference between comparative literature and world literature. And at that time, the discipline of world literature has yet to take a root in Europe and West. As Shishir Kumar Das and Sukanta Chaudhary observed. So in that lecture, Tagore doesn't explain about sorry for the background noise. Um, Tagore says very little about what literature means, but he expands on the theory of the world and what it means to be human in the world. So, according to him, the human faculties and human perception exist for the sole purpose of forging bonds with others. And the outcome of such interrelation is knowing others as our own and ourselves as other. And in the last paragraph, Dharwadkar mentions Tagore's very famous novel Ghare Baire or Ghare Behre, written in 1915 to published in 1915 and 16. The title, which means at home and outside. So it is surrounded by concentric circles, by its consciousness, its body, and its home and intimate sphere, and then outside the boundary wall of its household economy, successively by village or city, district, province, nation, continent, and world. Across these multiple domains, distinguished by their different social protocols, the consubstantiality of their souls gives human beings their common humanity. And Dharwadkar also mentions the views of metaphysics according to Upanishads, and he compares this concept of Atman with that of what Tagore said about uh, what it means to be connected to other humans. As in, the Atman is constant, it is same, and all human beings are a part of it. It is a spirit or soul. It is not divided, but it is one. And it also is similar to what Goethe said about deep humanism. And as Hans Kohn notes, the individual's highest goal is to achieve consciousness of himself as part of the whole, not of a national whole, but of the whole of humankind. So, the mention of Goethe is here as well, that of deep humanism. So from here now, Shohan will take over for the fourth and fifth part of the essay. Thank you.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Hello. Okay. So in the fourth part, Vinay Dovakar started discussing on A.K. Ramanujan. In the post-independent decades, A.K. Ramanujan tries to systematically displace the unified universalism and transcendental spiritualism, which invented by Tagore. According to Ramanujan, every language, literature, historical points, and cultural foundation have its own logic, grammar, poetics, and rhetoric which integrates their users. So every language, literature, and culture are unique, but every reasoned and reasonable worldview can be translated to any other reasonable worldview without distorting or restoring the spirit and rationality, even if the two cultures have a huge gap in inner logic. So Ramanujan took a near stand with Jonathan Swift, distancing from Kant, in which he says that human beings are rational but capable of reason. Also, in his late essay, some thought on non-Western classics, he says that a literary classic does express each and every aspect of a community in a language of its own, though it belongs to everyone who needs to experience and understand. It need effort, but we need carefully focus on the uniqueness that cultural expression. Also, the universal elements. Ramanujan called language as a connective tissue of the world, a permeable membrane. His infrastructure of world literature is underwritten by humanism. The construction of universal frame is not homogenized culture, but he tends to experience human diversity and often stand for it, may speak freely for itself. On the other hand, Salman Rushdie analyzed human world through a lens of migration. He says about the migration of words from different language, migration of idea into images, migration as a metaphor, which is seen everywhere around us. And he also said that we all are migrant people. In his Satanic Wars, Rushdie expand his idea to create more complete idea about intertextuality of migration. In that he put forth a migrant's eye view of the world, written from experience of a migrant condition. He also answered the question which I personally like to ask: how newness entered to the world through the. He answered it in the way like through the mass migration and through the exposure of the migrants to another culture, which understand them to become a new and unexpected combination of human beings. Rushdie relocated the universal humanism with Arjun Appaduri's idea, which he called a world of structure and other stable frames, to a world of fundamentally characterized by object of mother. Also, Appaduri's observation of the world was this is a world of flows. In the fifth part of the essay, Vinay started analyzing Tagore, Ramanujan, and Rushdie. Tagore, Ramanujan, and Rushdie represent a evolution of Indian concept of world literature at the late colonial and early and late post-colonial moments. Tagore opens a door by establishing a spiritual basis for a globe order of literature and culture for his contemporaries and successors. But nations like late colonial writers, colonial writers in Asia, Africa, and America, his vision was firmly to his own nation to be. But Ramanujan represents a world at large without bonding their characters in his text to a single national landscape, and give glimpses of new and different sort of globalizing imagination. As example, in late poem of Ramanujan in March, he gives more clear view about the idea of globalizing imagination. On the other hand, Rushdie's diasporic fiction and criticism had more logical extreme, leaving the writers and characters free to roam the earth without any constraints. All three writers, through going and self-consistent worlding the literature itself, their conceptualization of world and world literature is beyond any other nation or national tradition. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, yes. Go on.
Okay. So Tagore underpins the universalism and humanism in his work into a much more wider circuit than Hindu Brahmo spiritualism. Writer Martha Nussbaum suggests Tagore's ideal of a person who allegiances to the worldwide community of human beings remained alternative patriotic pride, which is morally dangerous. Though Tagore's humanism is grounded in a specifically Indian concept of self or spirit, a major part of his universalism, his account of world literature find a philosophical secured in a cosmopolitanism by defining transnational. On the other hand, Ramanujan and Rushdie suggest a world literature should not be located something spiritual or merely Indian. Both both Ramanujan and Rushdie belongs to the two successive literary generations influenced by existentialism. Jawaharlal Nehru's Fabian socialism and secular humanism in post-colonial India, in absence of Krell, calls all otherworldly underpinning. Sartre's at time Sartre argues that one must take subjectivity as one's point of departure. That Krell goes on saying for Sartre, man's freedom to act is rooted in subjectivity, which grants man his dignity. So Sartre's existentialism was visible with Ramanujan and Rushdie's ideas, but it wasn't the only European parallel for their Nehruvian position. Martin Heidegger's Letter of Humanism rejects this Sartre's idea, formulating and become a manifest of post-humanism. Jacob Burckhardt tells the decisive rupture with ancient and medieval Europe as inventing the individual. After that, Heidegger, after that, many this was on Heidegger, argues that the latter piece of modernity begins when man becomes a subject, where man becomes upon which all the grounded as regards the manner of its being and its truth. Max Weber describes modernity as the disattachment of the world. Humanism is nothing but a moral aesthetic anthropology, where anthropology explains and evaluates whatever is in its entirety from the standpoint of a man and in the relation of man. And Vinay concludes this essay by stating that Ramanujan and Rushdie, different from Tagore, constructed their own transnational vision of world literature. That's all from my part, and now we are open for queries.
Yes. Questions, queries, doubts? All clear. Nobody has any doubt. आप लोग जीनियस हो सब लोग. नेक्स्ट वीक पता चलेगा कितना आता है आपको. No questions, no queries, nothing, no doubts.
Sir, in this in this essay, at the beginning, I for the first time I read the two terms Marg and Desi. Actually,
Okay.
I have always known that there were two parts of the tradition of arts in India. That one is classical and the other is folk arts, folk related culture.
Mhm.
But I
Right.
didn't know that this two distinctions were
Acha.
present.
Actually, you find these distinctions in a big way in music traditions, right? But also in Sanskrit. Just turn off this video for a moment. You find this convention, two categories, Margiya and Desi. So Margiya implies something that is trans-regional, something that goes beyond a particular regionality, provinciality. And that includes Sanskrit very often, because Sanskrit is not grounded in a particular region of India. It has a spread from Afghanistan to Burma, right, and Java and whatnot. While uh, Desi would be about this or place, right? So this would mean region, and it is opposite of Marg in a sense that cultural practices which are regionally situated, right? Artistic practices which are having some geographical location, right? While Margiya would involve a kind of uh, traditions of the way, means they don't have a station, they just travel, right, across large regional spaces. So these two categories are used in uh, uh, Indian classical music traditions as well. So Desi music forms, rag would be Desi, a particular rag, right? Which means it is from particular region. While some would be Margiya rags, that those rags which are sung across the species. You find it in Gujarat and you would also find it in Kashmir and so on and so forth. So that is what he seems to be implying here. So these two categories were uh, transmuted, right? Sanskrit and the regional was later on configured as classical. The term classical comes from, of course, it comes from Western cultural history, right? So in 1903, when Indians were exposed to Western cultural history, they classified Sanskrit as classical, and whatever was specific to region in regional languages like Kannada or Marathi or Tamil would be Desi, right? So, and in 19th century, because India was on a massive scale exposed to the West, so whatever was not Indian was thought to be world literature, right? So Vishwa Sahitya is anything which is non-national. That is how it was imagined onwards. That's what he is saying. So Rashtra versus Vishwa was how was thought. Though Rashtra doesn't mean nation in modern sense of the word because it implies kingdom, right? Rashtra means kingdom. Yes. So does that help you to clarify something?
Yes, sir. But there are also some. Let's take an example of the dance forms. Like there are some classical dance forms particular to regions. Bharatnatyam
Now
for
there is a
Tamil Nadu.
problem with the term classical dance because word classical itself comes from exposure to Western cultural history, right? In India, there was no such thing like classical dance. There were dance forms like Bharatnatyam, like Odissi, like Kathak, and very often they were associated with women who were courtesans, right? Not so it was not meant for elite people. And so what happens is that during 19th century, we needed national dance, classical dance tradition. And that's why we, Indian intellectuals, Arundel, Rukmini Arundel would sanitize Bharatnatyam and Kathak and Odissi and Mohiniyattam or whatever into classical dance form, right? But it was largely courtesans and Ganikas and Devadasis who used to perform this, and that's why elite upper caste women were not allowed to perform this. But after 19th century, we required national dance because whole national imagination comes only with our encounter with the West. Anything you have to say about this?
So, sir, I was reading this particular book. I don't recall the exact title, but it was about the history of the conservative thought. It was written by Jaitirth Rao, and it said that uh, when we talk about the India as a nation, we always talk about how the concept of nation is foreign, and that India as it is existing today was not existing back at the time, and that in ancient Sanskrit era there was no uh, concept of India as a country. But there are some texts which describes how there were natural borders to this, let's say, a subcontinent. For example, in the south there was big sea surrounding the land, and in the north there was uh, ice-covered mountains, snow-covered mountains. So this piece of land is called this. It was like described like that. So
Yeah, it
do
was
we?
Bharatvarsh, right? The term used was Bharatvarsh. Hindustan was also used later on after Islamic rules of various kinds, ethnicities settled down in India. But India as a nation state, as we understand ourselves as citizens of India, nationality as something connecting a Punjabi person or a Sikh with a Tamilian, right? As nationality as a marker of identity and citizenship, and as a political unity did not exist, right? We are a political unit. We are a geographical unit, which is constructed by a political unit, right? That did not exist. So I know Sant poet would say मैं भारतीय हूँ. In fact, even Queen of Jhansi would say मैं मेरी झांसी नहीं दूंगी. Not ऐसे नहीं कह रही थी कि मैं भारत के लिए जान दूंगी. वो saying मैं मेरी झांसी नहीं. And you may be aware that in 1947, Sardar Patel had to unify hundreds and hundreds of small minor kingdoms into a single nation state. So it was we forged through political will, sometimes forced, sometimes voluntarily, as in case of Gaikwad state. But in case of Junagadh state or in case of Hyderabad or Kashmir, a different politics had to play out. So the idea of India as a political, cultural unit and idea of belonging to a single nation state is very much a product of 20th century, late 19th century. उससे पहले नहीं था. Kabir won't say I am part. Or Vyas would not say right now. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So if we take this concept of political unity, that is the nation outside, and let's say that the culture wise, can't we say that there was something similar to what we call Indian culture today?
You can say there was a lot of there is a lot of diversity even today. In spite of political unity, you can see Tamil Nadu has its own distinctive culture, Kerala would have its own distinctive culture, Gujarat would have its distinctive culture, Punjab would have its distinctive culture. But is there any central cultural ground which is common to all of these? Can you say that there is a culture of Bengalis and culture of Gujarat has some common ground? Even what can be eaten and what cannot be eaten changes, right? For Punjab and for example in Bengal, eating fish, offering prasad of fish is so common. But in Gujarat, there is a kind of aversion to among the elites towards non-vegetarian foods. At least that is what they say. I don't know how many of them practice that, but you can see the cultural differences. In Punjab, you will see a different kind of culture. In Tamil Nadu, you will see. In Karnataka, you will find something else. In Maharashtra, you will find something else. So given this diversity, can we find single cultural code that is common to all? Can we find that? What do you say? Does it exist?
I mean, sir, there must exist some common thread.
तो बताओ ना. Must means बताओ.
उसके लिए सर स्टडी करना पड़ेगा.
तो करके बताना मुझे. मुझे नहीं मिला है आज तक.
ठीक है सर.
अगर आपको मिल जाए तो मुझे भी बता देना.
Yes, sir.
And there was a concept called Aryavrat, means the land of the Aryans. And you find that till 4th century or so. And it is largely in the North India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, what is today Afghanistan, Pakistan, right? These 5 rivers and 7 rivers. Sapta Sindhu, as they say, were 7 rivers of Punjab. 5 rivers of Punjab, right? So Saraswati is invisible. So these rivers and land where Aryans settled, which extended slowly and gradually towards Magad later on, that is the Gangetic bed. That area would later on be called Aryavrat. But that does not include South India, right? So Aryavrat is largely a North Indian geographical territory. Bharatvarsh would imply maybe civilizational and cultural space, civilizational and cultural geography, right? That I can give you, that existed, but that also was a very different kind of belonging to it. You did not really belong to it the way you belong to India today. Aadhaar card, right? ऐसा कुछ था नहीं उस time. So the way you belong to that geocultural space, right, called Bharatvarsh, is not the same way that you belong to India today. I hope you get what I'm saying.
Yes, sir.
So when we project modern notion of nation backwards into the past, I think we mistake cultural space for a political unity, which did not exist, never existed. There is a difference between cultural, geocultural space and political unity. Right? These are two different things.
Hello. So,
Yeah.
so while reading this essay, I got an idea like when we compare Tagore with Ramanujan and Rushdie, we can see that Tagore was more of a very constrained. He come up with very constrained or very bonded kind of ideology about this humanism. But Ramanujan and Rushdie was more of a transnational vision and about the world literature. So, could we say that Tagore was more conservative in his ideas?
See, I don't know how to measure person's progressiveness or conservativeness. Tagore is talking about this in 19 what? In which year is he giving this speech of Vishwa Sahitya? 1919 delivered later on, right? After 1990 or so. Ramanujan is talking about this after 50 years. And Rushdie is talking about this after 70 years of Tagore. So, understanding of world literature has changed over a period of time, according to Vinay Dharwadkar, right? For Tagore, it is kind of abstract spiritual understanding of humanism, that human being is as a spiritual domain. And he talks about world literature as a temple to time. महाकाल के लिए मंदिर बना रहे हैं और वो मंदिर में इलियाड भी होगा और महाभारत भी होगा and all that. So he has got a very spiritualistic, humanistic, Brahmo Samajistic kind of thinking about world literature in the beginning of 20th century. By the time you come to A.K. Ramanujan, he is influenced not only by the classics of non-Sanskrit classics, right? He is also influenced by modernistic poetry that he himself wrote, and he also traveled and settled abroad. So Ramanujan has a different conception of world literature, which is also humanistic, right? As we find out here. But it lacks kind of spiritualism that Tagore seems to uphold. Rushdie, almost writing many decades after Ramanujan, would talk about world literature as a kind of existentialist and migrant category, right? So while Ramanujan and Tagore think of home as something static, for Rushdie there is no static home, because you are always flowing in the world, right? You are uprooted and flowing in the world. So this sense of uprootment from your home informs certain kind of cosmopolitan thinking of Rushdie, which can be called diasporic and existentialist view of literature, world literature, or the space of the global space of world literature. So migrant experiences of uprootedness and mobility are foregrounded in Rushdie. right? Who belongs to a
Sir.
period of globalization, while A.K. Ramanujan belongs to more modernist moment in Indian history. And Tagore is almost pre-independence period. So instead of saying this is more progressive and this is regressive, it is better to historically situate them on three moments or three phases of thinking about cosmopolitanism. Right? Three different ways to think about cosmopolitanism. So does that respond to your question, Sohan? It's not that ये conservative है और ये progressive है. वो Tagore is the great grandfather, right? And Rushdie is the father, and A.K. Ramanujan is the grandfather. Yeah, so these are three generations of writers here, who will obviously have a different way of looking at the world, right?
Sir, Rushdie's point of view matches that of Damroche's point of view, right?
It's similar in focusing on circulation, right?
Yes.
Correct. Any other question, doubt, query?
Hello, sir.
Yeah. So,
Lecture from
हाँ पता हूँ छोटा के पास network. Bolo. Any doubts, questions, queries about this? If not, then we can meet next week for the same paper, and we have our exams on 30th, right? Confirm?
Yes, sir.
3 to 4:20 p.m. 420. 412B. It is open book test. 2 questions of 15 marks each, 30 marks, right? 2 essay type questions. Okay. So we meet next week for this, and for tomorrow we'll discuss comparative literature and translation studies, and we can also talk about the test for that, right? When should we have it? The paper structure will remain the same. Okay.
Okay, sir. Good day, sir.
Yeah, and in the 12B, unit number 2 and 3, I will tell you which units for 11, 411 tomorrow, right?
Okay, sir.
See you and have a good day.